Now, from Wish TV, your local news source, this is All Indiana Politics.
Good morning and welcome to All Indiana Politics. I'm Garrett Bergquist. A provision in the federal budget bill would prohibit the states from enforcing any regulations on AI for 10 years. That's upset some state lawmakers across the country, including here in Indiana. I talked to State Representative Matt Pierce. He's worked on technology and AI issues in the Indiana General Assembly. He tells me that rule freeze could put your privacy and your cybersecurity at risk. And joining us now is State Representative Matt Pierce. Representative, thank you for coming in today.
You're welcome.
The federal budget bill includes a 10-year ban on states enacting their own AI rules. Why do you view that as problematic?
Well, it'd be one thing if the Congress was actually going to pass comprehensive regulation of AI that at least has minimal protections for consumers and society in general, but there's no indication Congress is going to get around to that anytime soon. So that essentially means by blocking the states, there'll be no one looking out and trying to determine whether or not some common sense regulations are needed. And it also, the way it's written, I think would wipe out a lot of things we've already done. So we're worried about deepfakes that are going on in AI, people misleading people during elections. There's lots of uses that AI could be put to that are a detriment, and a lot of states are stepping out and trying to address those.
What regulations specifically here in Indiana do you fear this could jeopardize?
Well, one example is we just recently passed a bill that addressed law enforcement using AI to identify suspects through lineups. And what we found is in some other jurisdictions, the law enforcement was getting a little bit lazy and relying completely on AI to sort out through facial recognition who may have committed a crime. And they weren't doing that basic police work to back it up and confirm it. And so we saw instances of innocent people being ensnared because the AI algorithm couldn't get it right. And so we passed a law that essentially says law enforcement, if you're going to use AI, you need to have some humans also doing good old-fashioned police work to confirm whatever AI might be suggesting is the suspect to pursue.
What conversations have you and your colleagues had so far with Indiana's congressional delegation about that provision in the bill?
Well, we haven't had, there's so many issues going on in Washington, so I'm not aware of if people have reached out to the, I guess, the U.S. Senate now, where this is probably ultimately going to be decided. The problem is you have this massive federal budget bill. There's all kinds of issues that concern legislators in it. And then you have this one little piece that says there's this 10-year moratorium on any enforcement of state laws concerning AI. And so you have to wonder how many legislators even have become aware that this is something that's out there as a possibility.
What do you make of the argument that leaving it up to the states will just result in a patchwork of regulations?
Well, I think there's some truth to that. I mean, if we had one good, strong federal regulation that protected consumers and addressed the potential downsides of artificial intelligence, then I think you can make an argument for preempting the states and having one national level law. But if we look at, for example, privacy legislation, Congress has not been able in the last decade to address any comprehensive privacy protection. So it's had to be the states who step up. And if we did not have states stepping up, there would be no privacy protections at all for anyone in America. And so I think if Congress is going to want to prohibit states from operating in a particular area of the law, then they have an obligation to step up and do it themselves and have that national comprehensive law.
Right now with the state level regulations, how much commonality is there across the states? Like, for example, when you were working on AI legislation, how much discussion was there with your counterparts in other states?
You know, the truth is the laws are pretty similar. So California was kind of the first out of the box, but there's some of Virginia was kind of early too. And so I think what Indiana tended to do was look at what other states had done. And I think it took the template from a bunch of other states in the way they had done it and just applied that. So the truth is, I think that tech companies that are looking at all these different states that have privacy laws, trying to figure out how do we deal with that. In most cases, the laws are very similar. So I don't think it's very difficult. There are a few, states that are maybe a little more aggressive than others, but I think for the most part, we haven't really heard from the tech industry lately that, oh, we can't operate because we have this horrible patchwork of laws throughout the country.
Based on the conversations you've had, what would the ideal set of AI regulations look like at the federal level?
Well, I think that it could at least address the most immediate things that we're seeing, things like deepfakes. I mentioned the issue of law enforcement potentially using AI. So I think there's specific kind of negative things we're beginning to see emerge that could be addressed. But I think that on a broader context, you want to create kind of a system of ethics for AI, or kind of some guardrails, and require companies as they're beginning to roll things out to be thinking about what are, I need to test this AI algorithm, this system I've created, and think about what are the potential negative aspects of that. So in a lot of ways, to me, I think that artificial intelligence is a lot like pharmaceutical drugs, right? So drugs can be tremendously helpful in curing disease and treating symptoms, but they can also have side effects. Sometimes they can do more harm than good. And so we have a Food and Drug Administration that makes those drug companies go through the tests, see what are the positives and negatives, and ultimately experts in that area decide whether that drug is safe and effective and can be marketed. And I think that maybe at the end of the day, you're going to need some system similar to that, where at a minimum, you're telling the individual companies to go through a process to make sure that what you're using is safe and effective.
Senator Todd Young and I have spoken on this topic several times, and he said that he believes that a lot of the existing federal laws can easily be extended to AI, such as laws dealing with child pornography, that sort of thing. Based on your own legislative experience, do you agree with that? I
don't think in every instance. And so, for example, it's situations where, high schools are creating deep fakes where you have, their classmates being portrayed in sexual situations. And we looked at that and we didn't really see particular law that would apply. Now, it's true that if you're portraying someone under the age of 18, it could be considered child pornography. But on the other hand, if it's not using real people, so AI is kind of a fake image, then you have an additional layer where you have to prove that the deep fake is also obscene. And that's very difficult to do. That's a very long, multi-part test to get through. So I think that while, yes, there are laws out there that can apply to particular instances, I think that you need more of a comprehensive approach in the end.
And that does lead me into my next question. South Dakota Senator Mike Rounds has said that looking at this, he thinks could be an interstate commerce clause issue, and that's something that's reserved for the federal government. So do you see this as potentially a situation where, in this case, with the lack of action at the federal level, the 10th Amendment would override that?
No, I think that when it comes to the Commerce Clause, as long as states are treating out-of-state companies the same way they would treat in-state companies, I don't think you really have a Commerce Clause problem there, particularly when the federal government is not regulating. If you had some comprehensive federal regulations, then okay, maybe you have some implications that you have to look at there. But I think as long as states are treating everyone fairly, I mean, the point of the Commerce Clause is you don't want states trying to give their own hometown businesses an advantage over out-of-state companies. And so I'm not that concerned about it. Privacy is really a similar kind of issue. We've had lots of states adopt privacy laws, and we haven't seen any of those overturned on a Commerce Clause argument.
Representative Matt Pierce, thank you for coming in today.
Thank you.
And Pierce is not the only state lawmaker criticizing the idea. Republican State Representative Andrew Ireland says on X, strongly oppose the 10-year moratorium on state regulation of AI. Some states are going to get this wrong and over-regulate, but the last thing we need to do is to cede more power to the federal government. Coming up, the state may have lost hundreds of thousands of dollars in execution drugs. We'll tell you just how much each drug cost. Welcome back. Potentially hundreds of thousands of dollars worth of drugs used to carry out executions were wasted. The death penalty is on pause in Indiana. That's because the state has run out of its stock of lethal drugs used for executions. Our Tim Spears explains how some weren't used as intended.
According to Governor Mike Braun, pentobarbital, the lethal drug Indiana used to execute Joseph Corcoran last year and Benjamin Ritchie last month, cost $300,000 per use. We knew the state bought at least $900,000 worth of the drug under Governor Eric Holcomb, And now the Indiana Department of Correction tells me 2 doses of the drug simply expired. Then the state had to buy an additional dose, an estimated $1.2 million for 2 lethal injections.
Something that's got a shelf life of 90 days. I think we got in a pickle where we, stored 3.
Governor Mike Braun says there's no plans to restock the state's inventory of deadly drugs to execute Indiana's 6 remaining death row inmates.
And then something that costs, I think, $300,000 a pop that has a 90-day shelf life. I'm not going to be for putting it on the shelf and then letting them expire.
Bernice Corley, the executive director of the Indiana Public Defender Council, believes this moment is an opportunity to discuss the future of the death penalty.
Really, we need to re-examine what is the point or what is the utility of the death penalty.
After a 15-year hiatus, Indiana's short revival of the death penalty drew protests, then raised questions about the use of lethal injection drugs, when Benjamin Ritchie's attorney said he had a violent reaction during his execution.
And his feet were moving for about 10 seconds. Then he sat up and violently twitched for about 3 seconds. Lay back down. Definitely a very violent twitch.
The Department of Corrections tells ITmate Ritchie's execution was completed according to protocol. No media was allowed to serve as an independent witness. Governor Braun suggested, along with abolishing the death penalty, the state could consider alternate methods, like firing squad, which is used in other states.
We got to address the broad issue of what are other methods, the discussion of capital punishment in general.
Is there a humane way to carry out an execution?
No, death is death. So we will consistently oppose the death penalty.
Republican State Representative Bob Morris tells me he plans to once again introduce legislation for Indiana to abolish the death penalty next session. In studio, Tim Spears for Wish TV and WishTV.com.
Coming up, Indiana's best political team on Governor Braun's sudden replacement of 3 IU trustees. Welcome back to All Indiana Politics as we welcome in 2 members of Indiana's best political team, Democrat Lindsy Hake and Republican Bartlett. Thank you both for coming in today.
Thank you.
So we heard some interesting comments from Governor Mike Braun in that last segment regarding Indiana's death penalty. Allie, does this suggest that we might see a push next session either to repeal the death penalty or to add additional methods?
Yeah, I think it will be interesting to see where he takes things. Obviously, this, like you said, will be a decision to be made by the legislature. But at the end of the day, look, Mike Braun is a businessman, as we know, and he's really looking at this from an ROI perspective. Like, that's an expensive drug with a very short shelf life. So whether that means exploring different methods for how to approach this or re-exploring the concept of capital punishment altogether, I do think it'll be something that they look into, as they should. That's the job of the legislature. And yeah, he was right to bring it up from an ROI perspective.
Lindsay, realistically, how much appetite is there in the General Assembly to make any changes to the death penalty?
Well, this would not, if we were to discuss this in the 2026 legislative session, this would not be the first time that legislation regarding end-of-life care or even all of the criminal elements to the side of the conversation regarding law enforcement and how we carry out the justice system. That is not a new thing. You know, I know Representative Pierce, who we heard from in the A block, also has filed legislation regarding end of care and end of life care. I know that's different than what we're dealing with here in this scenario, but you know, to Allie's point, I think it's really important that we, first of all, we remember that the media is not allowed to watch these in Indiana. That's a problem. With sunlight comes accountability and a process to make sure that we're making sure that this is a humane way to carry out our law enforcement measures and justice.
Now, it's worth noting that the only other state that explicitly does not allow media is Wyoming, and they don't have anyone on death row right now.
Yeah, so this is an important topic. I absolutely expect it to be discussed next year, and if it's not, I'll be pretty disappointed.
Well, speaking of the governor, Braun fired 3 alumni-elected members of the IU Board of Trustees on Monday, and one of those trustees still had about 2 to 3 years left on her term. Lindsay, the replacements include longtime conservative attorney Jim Bopp. What influence might those trustees have?
Yeah, I mean, time will only tell. I mean, obviously their first meeting is June 12th, so we've got only a few days here to see what will happen. and they've got a pretty hefty agenda on their docket for Monday. But I'll be really honest with you. I can't endorse the Jim Bob. There's so many IU alums, myself included, so disappointed that Jim Bob is part of the framework now for the governing body of Indiana University. I'm not surprised, but super disappointed, and it's a sad day for IU fans, and a lot of alumni are upset, withdrawing dollar donations, withdrawing any support, speaking with their pocketbook.
Allie, I'll let you respond to that as well. But also, Governor Braun at the end of session said that he would most likely let those alumni-elected trustees finish out their terms. So did he break a promise here?
I don't think so. I think, looking back at the comments he made at the end of session, he never made an explicit commitment to keep them on for the end of their terms. These were folks who had a short amount of time left on their terms, and he had two very capable alumni presented to him as potential replacements. And so instead of just letting that stretch out, he decided to make that move now so that the university can get back to focusing on the good work that universities are doing in the state of Indiana. I mean, we've seen a lot of great shifts already, like, removing some of those harmful DEI programs, cost savings, tuition freezing. There's a lot of good work to be done. And I think the governor's decision was in an effort to continue that work and expedite it in the most efficient fashion possible. I think it was better for him to do it now than to draw things out and just have to deal with it later so that everybody can get back to work.
Let's talk about that freeze on AI regulations that we heard about in the first block of the show. Allie, how likely is it that idea survives in the Senate?
Look, I think that there's a lot still to be fleshed out with this bill in general. I don't know how likely it is. I think it's unlikely that it stays the way it is right now. I think there is a lot to still be considered, just like with any piece of legislation. Like, nothing's perfect at the outset, and so I think there's a lot of work still to be done. Whether it survives or is removed completely, I'm not sure, but I think it will change from where it's at right now.
Lindsay, what do you make of the arguments that were raised in favor of that provision, specifically the patchwork issue and the interstate commerce issue?
Sure, yeah, absolutely agree. Representative Matt Pierce is right on point with this issue. He is one of the, frankly, he's been one of the longest serving legislators dealing with this issue in a variety of committees at the State House ever since this became a topic in about, I think it was 2018-19 that it was first discussed. And so this is a voice that's critical to listen to, and the point is very well taken regarding the privacy concerns. That is what, but also I can't say I disagree with Representative Ireland as well, because a heavy hand on this issue and barring states from having any type of implementation ability for any type of regulation is, and I'll also point out, I appreciate his comments, but I would like him to govern that way as well, because I know that he's supported a lot of, he's upended a lot of local policy as well with these same reasons behind him, but in his argument. But I'll be honest with you, it's a heavy hand that limits state regulation, and it will really, really curb any ability for our legislature to protect Hoosiers and have any type of consumer-friendly legislation from being enacted.
I got about a minute left. I want to briefly address the very, very public rift between President Donald Trump and Elon Musk. Lindsay, you go first, about 30 seconds. How do you read this?
Yeah, it's such a food fight, man. It's been really hard to watch. I think it's a distraction from what's going on in the Senate right now. I think people really need to pay attention to that. You've got a lot of critical infrastructure issues that are being dealt with in this reconciliation bill, including human infrastructure like Medicaid and food stamps, SNAP, other things. So we need to pay attention.
Yeah. Allie, how do you read this?
Yeah, absolutely. So I do agree with Lindsay that this is a distraction from important things that are happening right now, like passing the one big beautiful bill and keeping taxpayers at the center of that effort. So, these are both very public individuals. Like, of course, people are going to focus on that, but I think we should shift the focus back to the good work that's being done in Congress right now, rather than on this rift that may or may not last.
Allie and Lindsay, thank you both for coming in today. We will be right back. Thank you for joining us for All Indiana Politics. We'll be back here next Sunday morning at 9:30. And be sure to check out the All Indiana Politics podcast online at wishtv.com. You'll find extended interviews there as well as our archive of past shows. Have a great rest of your weekend.